to bear arms is a relic of the 18th century. By and large, reaction has been critical, but not for the reasons you might expect. It's about process as opposed to principle. Harvard's eminent scholar, constitutional scholar, Laurence Tribe, for example, tweeting, "I admire Justice Stevens, but his supposedly simple but dramatic step of repealing the Second Amendment is awful advice. The obstacle to strong gun laws is political, not legal. Urging a politically impossible effort just strengthens opponents of achievable reform." Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry joins us now with more reaction to Stevens' ambitious proposal. Good evening, Ed.
Shannon, great to see a reality check here that repealing the Second Amendment would be a monumental task that is highly unlikely to happen. But this push highlights just how hard the left is trying to chip away at the right to bear arms, just as President Trump predicted back in the 2016 campaign. In fact, this time, it's 97-year-old retired Justice John Paul Stevens, who was nominated by a Republican president but became a leading liberal voice on the high court for some 35 years, now claiming the Second Amendment is, as you say, a relic of the 18th century that is outdated and misunderstood. Stevens clearly trying to gain momentum from those large anti-gun March for Our Lives rallies last weekend all around the country that were led by survivors of the Stoneman Douglas tragedy in Florida and other students around the country. The retired justice imploring the young people to take advantage of those crowds supporting their agenda because they may scare members of Congress to accept much more drastic change. In an op-ed published in the New York Times, Stevens wrote, quote, "That support is a clear sign to lawmakers to enact legislation prohibiting civilian ownership of semi-automatic weapons, increasing the minimum age to buy a gun from 18 to 21, and establishing more comprehensive background checks on all purchases of firearms. But the demonstrators should seek more effective and more lasting reform. They should demand a repeal of the Second Amendment." Stevens joins a motley crew of politicians, pundits, and news anchors suggesting the Second Amendment should be repealed. From Obama advisor Dan Pfeiffer jumping on this today to say Democrats have been brainwashed, in his words, into thinking they have to pander to hunters. To the New York Times' Bret Stephens, who has suggested the Second Amendment is tied to the higher incidence of gun-related homicides in the U.S., to former DNC chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who has actually introduced a bullet control bill, saying the Second Amendment does not guarantee a right to bear bullets. The Stevens-led push coming even as some top Democrats admit it's simply not going to happen.
The effect of the Second Amendment, as it's now construed, is to make federal judges the final arbiters of gun policy, which is quite wrong, I think, and quite contrary to what the framers intended.
To change the Constitution, as you know, requires 67 votes in the House and I think 35, 45 states to ratify it, and it's within a period of time. I forget what it is, perhaps 6 years. I don't think that would be accomplished.
Now, while the NRA quickly denounced this effort, it's interesting that a columnist for the Washington Post wrote today, this may actually help the NRA and Republicans in the midterm elections. That is basically an in-kind contribution to the NRA, who can now use this threat as a boogeyman to try and help turn out conservative voters to keep House and Senate Republicans in power. Shannon?
All right, lots of reaction across the spectrum. Ed Henry, thank you very much. So where does this leave the gun debate? Many on the left have said it's hyperbole to suggest that they're after your guns or the Second Amendment, but now this. Let's talk about it with Chris Direwell, Fox News politics editor and author of The Halftime Report. Great to see you tonight.
Madam.
Okay, so UCLA law professor Adam Winkler tweeted this. He said Stevens' call to repeal the Second Amendment is not only ineffective, but worse. It makes it even harder to pass good gun laws today. It plays right into the hands of the NRA, which can now point to this op-ed and say, see, we told you they want to take away your rights and your guns.
Look, I'm sure that there are many people who are on the left side of this issue, on the gun control side of this issue, that are frustrated with Stevens. And I'm sure the people at the NRA are delighted, because this is exactly the kind of fundraising the kind of thing that helped them raise an enormous sum of money in February. And they're going to do it again in March. And this will help them. But, and I don't want, when I'm talking to a legal scholar such as yourself, I have to tread lightly, because all I know is hackery and flackery of politics. But isn't this the debate we're supposed to be having? Isn't this actually the debate that we're supposed to be having? Democrats have gotten into a crouch on this subject where they say, oh, no, 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 we love the guns. And the hunters, oh, my gosh, we love the hunters so much.
And the ads where they're wearing camo, they're out shooting.
Out shooting. But they don't want to talk about what the Second Amendment really says. And the Second Amendment Amendment doesn't say anything about doe season. What the Second Amendment says is that in order to keep the people free, that their right to keep and bear arms will not be abridged. It's those two sentiments may be in tension, right? A well-regulated militia versus the unabridged rights of individuals to have firearms. This is the debate that Americans should be having. This is a fruitful debate. Is the Second Amendment a good idea or a bad idea? Should it be revised? Should it be updated? That's a fruitful discussion. But Ed used the phrase chipping away. Well, that's exactly what's been happening. What's been happening, what Democrats have been trying to do is chip away at that Second Amendment, that bold pronouncement of the Second Amendment that shall not be infringed, instead of talking about the more fundamental debate that Stevens wants them to get to.
Yeah, well, they had the debate at the Supreme Court in 2008 in the Heller case, and 5-4 in an opinion written by the late Justice Antonin Scalia. It's one of the first cases I covered at the court. They said the Second Amendment is about self-defense, and it is about an individual right to own a gun.
Right.
So there are contours that have already been decided. But, you know, I read some pieces today by folks on the left that were like, yeah, the Heller decision, so what? Like Supreme Court precedent, so what? No, I just want to remind people, if you want to repeal this thing, this is what it would take.
Right.
We're going a little schoolhouse rock on it, because I had to look it up to be sure today, too. Okay, to repeal a constitutional amendment, 2/3 majority in the U.S. House and Senate, I chuckle, then 3/4 of every state legislature, so that's 38 states. Or you can do this. Constitutional convention has to be called by 2/3 of states, and then 3/4 of the states have to approve. They cannot even pass the most basic things along majority lines in the Senate or the House.
Remember the phrase,
right
the soft bigotry of low expectations?
Yes.
We have applied that to politics and politicians to an unacceptable degree. The process of amending the Constitution is designed to be difficult, but if what Democrats want to do, I shouldn't say Democrats, but if what gun control people want to do is control guns, then go address the Second Amendment. Come up with a replacement, because you can't repeal it. You replace it with another amendment that says you could just have a one line.
Still the same process, though.
It's totally the same process. But then come up with an alternative. Talk about what it should look like. I am sick and tired of Americans ignoring the Constitution in a lot of ways, but one of the ways in which Americans ignore the Constitution is we have a remedy for these questions, and it's not at the courts, and it's not in some cockamamie bill that's passed to try to suck up or pander in the wake of a disaster. If you want to change the Constitution, amend the Constitution. That's what you're supposed to do.
It is a heavy lift, and these are difficult conversations, but there's just no scenario in which I see the Second Amendment being repealed, as you said, outright. Under this scenario, that's just not going to happen.
No, but
not in our lifetime.
Not in our lifetimes, but I would say that there is a possibility. If you want to have a national conversation about guns, somebody needs to come up with an amendment and debate it and talk about, is the militia going to be better regulated, or are the rights going to be abridged? It's time for us to have a discussion that's worthy of both our forebears and our founders, but also the victims of these shootings, instead of this cockamamie political theater that goes back and forth and only ends up in more fundraising and less action.
Will you let me know what your Twitter feed says tonight?
Uh-oh.
It's at Chris Stonewall. Okay, thank you, Chris. Good to see you. All right, breaking late tonight, Chinese confirmation that North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un did indeed make a surprise visit. Rich Edson joins us to explain what it all means for plans for talks between the leader of the rogue regime and our own, President Trump. Rich?
Good evening, Shannon. And Chinese and North Korean state media finally confirm it. Kim Jong-un was in China meeting with President Xi Jinping. This is Kim's first meeting with another head of state and first known trip outside North Korea since he assumed control of the country in 2011. Chinese state media reports Kim told President Xi he is committed to a nuclear-free Korean peninsula and is willing to discuss the issue with the United States. Kim is scheduled to meet with South Korean President Moon Jae-in next month, and in May, a possible meeting with President Trump. The president's already confirmed, says he wants to do it. Kim Jong-un has already returned to North Korea, and there was no official coverage of this event till after he left. There was little indication Kim was even in China over the past few days, except for the added security of the arrival of a special train he, like his father and grandfather, used previously to travel to China. Relations between North Korea and its most significant ally, China, have been strained. China has opposed North Korea's nuclear and missile programs and wants to resolve this fight with the West without any more instability in the region. The Chinese government has also signed on to United Nations Security Council resolutions isolating North Korea's economy. The Trump administration says those sanctions have forced Kim to come to the negotiating table. Shannon.
Rich, thank you very much for that late-breaking detail. We appreciate it. Also tonight, Breaking. The Chinese government briefing the White House on Kim Jong-un's visit to Beijing. White House correspondent Kevin Corke is here with a reaction to that, as well as the latest on the administration's new crackdown on Russia. Some real hot spots there on foreign policy. Kevin?
Boy, we're just going to cover the gamut here for you tonight, Shannon. And let me just share this. Very interesting. As you pointed out, the Chinese government did reach out to the White House tonight. In fact, President Xi of China had a specific and personal message to President Trump, obviously translated for the President of the United States. I can also tell you that they were talking about the visit of Kim Jong-un to Beijing. Let me share part of a statement issued by the White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. It reads in part, we see this development as further evidence that our campaign of maximum pressure is creating an atmosphere of appropriate dialogue with North Korea. Very interesting. Meanwhile, the Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, was also talking about what happened with the Russians. You and I have had a chance to talk about that devastating nerve agent attack on a former Russian spy on British soil. He said that amounted to basically an attempted murder. Now, as you can well imagine, I was in the White House press briefing today, and I had a chance to ask Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, about that. And what I wanted to know was the U.S. doing all it could to combat Russian aggression? Is the administration applying maximum pressure on Russia? Do you believe that that's what's happening by way of what we saw yesterday and beyond? And if not, why not?
We're certainly applying pressure on Russia. We're certainly encouraging and working with our allies and partners also to do so. And I think you've seen an unprecedented number of countries step up and join the United States in that effort.
That, of course, was the message from the White House just a day after the Trump administration kicked out 60 Russian intelligence officers and, of course, closed that Russian consulate over in Seattle. Said Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, Russia has chosen to be a strategic competitor, even to the point of reckless activity. They are doing things they think are deniable. They're trying to break the unity of the Western alliance. Here's NSC spokesman Michael Anton.
This is an unprecedented action. We looked through the history books and could not find another instance of so many countries acting all at once in concert on the same issue at the same time. And that's something that President Trump absolutely deserves credit for. This wouldn't have happened without his leadership.
Meantime, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov responded today saying the U.S. was essentially blackmailing its allies to throw out so many Russian officials all around the world. As you can imagine, the State Department fired back.
I would say that that's ludicrous. Or standing in solidarity with our ally. That is a ridiculous comment that he made.
Now, all this, Shannon, is happening on a day that we can tell you about a major announcement on trade between the U.S. and South Korea. Very interesting. By the way, it's the first such deal by President Trump since he took office in January 2017. Now, in it, Washington and Seoul have agreed to the number of numeric targets on both cars and steel. The bottom line here is the administration says this is great news for the American worker and American companies, and it prevents an all-out trade war with South Korea by also keeping them out of the crosshairs of those steel tariffs that they were trying to avoid. Very interesting night at the White House. Back to you.
A very busy one. Kevin Corke, thanks for filling us in. And you would think easing some of those trade war fears would help. It did yesterday with the markets, but they plummeted today, a day after soaring, and traders are blaming now Facebook. Its stock is down 20% from its February high. The FTC and 37 states' attorneys general are investigating Facebook, and Cook County, Illinois is suing the company. The lawsuit states that Facebook violated state fraud law and says Facebook is not a social media company. It is the largest data mining operation in existence. Founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg is scheduled to testify before Congress April 10th. Well, breaking news on the Sanctuary State showdown straight ahead. The rebellion against the resistance just got uglier. We're going to head to Orange County for the very latest. And then we'll debate not gun control, bullet control with tonight's panel. Is it something for law-abiding gun owners to worry about? Plus, some celebrities are going all in on helping illegal immigrants evade enforcement agents. Details on that coming up. And another against a Southern California county aligning itself with the president. Trace Gallagher has the stories for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Shannon, the Department of Commerce says the citizenship question is being reinstated for the 2020 census because the more you know about the voting age population, the lower the chance of voting rights violations. Of course, the census is supposed to count everyone living in the U.S. regardless of citizenship. It's the way the country establishes poverty guidelines and distributes billions of dollars in federal programs. It also determines how many seats each state has in the House of Representatives. California claims that asking about citizenship is illegal, and the state has already filed a lawsuit. It's 27th against the Trump administration, if you're counting. The main worry is that illegal immigrants won't participate. Here's the state attorney general.
Given the way that this administration has attacked immigrants, you can understand why immigrant families would be afraid to fill out the census questionnaire.
And undercounting the population could result in California losing one of its seats in Congress, along with losing a lot of federal dollars. Meantime, California is getting resistance from within. Today, the Orange County Board of Supervisors, all Republicans, voted to join the federal lawsuit against the state's sanctuary laws, adding big-time affirmation to other conservative parts of California fed up with protecting illegal immigrants. And because sanctuary laws prohibit local law enforcement from cooperating with federal immigration agents, Orange County Sheriff Sandra Hutchins is now using a Who's in Jail database to notify the public and ICE agents when inmates, including illegals, are set free. Here's the sheriff.
And let me just give you some examples of some individuals we've had to release. How about sex with a minor, child cruelty, domestic violence? I mean, I don't think I could sleep at night knowing that I had let somebody go and they go out and commit another crime with those kinds of charges.
In response, the California Attorney General is hinting that he's open to arresting members of the Orange County Sheriff's Department for assisting U.S. immigrations. The sheriff says she wouldn't advise it. Shannon.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. Please let us know, Trace. All right, so
Okay.
how ugly could the showdown between state and local officials get? Well, let's bring in Orange County Supervisor Sean Nelson. Welcome. So you all had a big vote tonight. Can you tell me whether you're going to be joining or starting your own lawsuit with respect to some of these sanctuary state laws?
Yes, Shannon, our objective is to join the existing lawsuit, just easier, and we have to make that attempt first. The judge doesn't have to let us in, but that's what we intend to do, to stand up for the citizens of Orange County, support the sheriff, and support the Department of Justice.
Okay, so no surprise to you that there's plenty of pushback on the thought that you would do that. From the state senator who wrote SB 54, one of these laws that essentially equates to state sanctuary state status. He says this: pushing a racist and anti-immigrant agenda devoid of facts or supporting legal analysis is a pretty sad use of taxpayer resources, especially when it could result in crippling legal costs for cities that rush to join this dead-end effort. Your response?
Well, as your audience may know from an earlier appearance by our sheriff, 170 people have been released just since January. It's not April yet. So it's easy for someone that doesn't live in our community to make those remarks. But the truth of the matter is, if you don't have facts on your side, start calling names. And when I see people dealing from the bottom of the deck and they immediately go to the racist name-calling effort, it's because they know the truth is not favorable to them. They are putting people in jeopardy, and they're making our law enforcement agents get involved in that, and they swore an oath to not do that.
Well, and on another front there in California, your state attorney general there has said he's going to sue over this idea that the question about citizenship will be on the 2020 census. Now, we looked back, and at least according to the form that's online under census.gov, that question was there in 2000, at least on the long form of the census. So it's not something absolutely new and never been done before in any recent administration. That was under the Clinton administration. But the DNC is not happy about this. And they say this: it's a craven attack on our democracy and a transparent attempt to intimidate immigrant communities. Trump and his Republicans are stoking fear and all but guaranteeing an inaccurate count that lays the groundwork for sustained racial gerrymandering and jeopardizes critical resources for communities across the country. Where do you stand on that?
Well, fear and demagoguing. Again, what is wrong with asking an honest question? There are no repercussions for people answering the census. The census is to gather information. The federal government has the duty to ask questions and get good data. And I suspect California is nervous because, frankly, we probably have a lot to hide. And I think we would be all better off if we cleanse ourselves and just get to the truth.
How do you think folks across California, you're there in Orange County, but how do you think more broadly folks feel about the policies there that are being passed at the state level? Because we were out there, took a show on the road a couple of weeks ago, and I had many people pull me aside. Obviously, they would be people who were watching Fox. But even folks on the left would stop and say to us, we don't love everything that's happening in Sacramento. We don't think it's good for our state. We've got this budget deficit and all kinds of problems, but it doesn't seem like they're voting any differently or taking out the state lawmakers or the governors who are implementing these policies.
Shannon, what's unique in California is, one, you've got the political landscape on the state level completely dominated by public employee unions. It's really a money issue, state teachers union, et cetera. And that's not an attack on them. It's just kind of a view of the facts as they sit. But if you talk to the average person, the response to this has been overwhelmingly positive from the average citizen. Very little blowback, other than at my meeting today. The natives came out, they were hostile. But the working men and women of Orange County have been overwhelmingly supportive. And the most common thing I hear is, it's common sense. Thank you for finally waking up and just essentially saying the emperor has no clothes. It's time to end this nonsense and stop being a breakaway republic of the United States of America. We all have to honor the Constitution, and it's time we get over that, even though some in Sacramento don't like the outcome.
Well, we know that there are local, state, and federal lawsuits flying back and forth in both directions between California and the feds. We will track all of them. In the meantime, Supervisor Shawn Nelson, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, up next. Isaac Towery was last seen February 9th. He lived with his mother in Las Vegas. Now police say they know what happened to him after arresting a bunch of MS-13 gang members. That story next. And a controversial idea from Planned Parenthood for a Disney princess. The taxpayer-funded group is responding exclusively to Fox News at Night. We'll bring you more on that next. Killing of 10 victims in the Las Vegas area over the past year. Tonight, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police says one of those victims is 23-year-old Isaac Towery, last seen February 9th, going from his mother's home where he lived to a friend's home nearby. His body was found a few weeks ago. The Department of Justice says a decline in prosecutions and limitations put on ICE agents to access county jails allowed the gang to rebound. While a recent DOJ prosecution found almost a third of MS-13 gang members entered the U.S. as unaccompanied children. Well, the ACLU enlisting the help of Hollywood elites for a video series called We Have Rights. These celebrity-narrated animated videos are aimed at teaching immigrants what to do if confronted by ICE agents.
Now, Esther's gut told her she should cooperate, but she remembered something she'd heard on the radio. ICE had been making early morning sweeps using tricks like this to get people to open their doors. Esther remembered she had rights. But do not be fooled, and do not open the door.
Tonight's panel, former Ohio Democratic Senate Minority Leader Capri Cafaro, Jamie Weinstein, the host of The Jamie Weinstein Show at the National Review Online, and Fox News contributor Guy Benson, also a political editor at townhall.com. Welcome to all of you.
Good evening.
Okay,
Thank you.
The ACLU says about this, it's to provide information to immigrant communities, but also to expose a broader American public to ICE's tactics. Guy, what's wrong with that?
You know, I actually don't have a huge problem with this. If these are people's rights and the ACLU is educating people about those rights, even if they are illegal immigrants, that's fine. I don't necessarily agree with their rhetoric about the dangerous anti-American thuggish tactics or whatever they say about ICE. I certainly support this more, or prefer this to public officials, for example, like a mayor, let's say, out in California, warning residents of impending ICE raids and allowing them to run off and escape, including people who are accused of crimes. So I think these are two separate questions.
Capri?
Look, I mean, you know, celebrities as well as the ACLU obviously have their First Amendment right to weigh in on this issue. I have great empathy as a human, as an American, and as a licensed social worker for these individuals who may be facing potential deportation just because they are not you know, quote unquote legal does not mean that they are not human beings. But, you know, at the same time, we have to recognize that there is a rule of law in the United States of America. But look, I mean, again, the ACLU and celebrities can do what they want. It's America, and they have an opportunity to express themselves in whatever way they see fit.
Jamie, I want to take you to the question of something we talked about a little bit earlier, which ties in with some of this. And this is the idea of the census form in 2020. It will have a question about whether or not you are a citizen. There's been a lot of blowback from the left about that, you know, calling it an attack on democracy. I read one article tonight that said that California gets an estimated additional 5 House seats because of the way that persons are counted up in California based on the census. This is what Jay Christian Adams says tonight of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. It's critical that the next redistricting cycle account for the citizen residents of districts so urban centers do not unfairly profit from the political subsidy that higher non-citizen populations provide. Is it a controversial idea to you, Jamie?
I think philosophically this is totally defensible. We should not be apportioning our districts based on immigrants in them or illegal immigrants even. But, I mean, let's be real here. If this was politically the other way, if Republicans would be losing seats because of this, they wouldn't be pushing it, and vice versa. Democrats wouldn't be outraged if this would benefit them. So, you know, the views on this depend entirely on political calculations. Republicans think they'll gain seats because of this. Democrats think are worried about it because they're going to lose seats. But, you know, philosophically, I don't have a problem with this. I think that's the way seats should be apportioned based on citizens in the district, not based on immigrants.
Guy?
Yeah, so I think that we've seen a few things here in terms of the argument. And some of it, to me, is just hysteria. This is the way until 2010, so from 1970 to 2000, the full form, the long form census always included the question of citizenship. And prior to 1950, for many, many decades, every census form sent out to all Americans included the citizenship question. This is not particularly controversial unto itself. And I've heard the argument, we heard it from the Attorney General of California earlier, well, this will make illegal immigrants afraid to fill out the census because they might be letting the government know that they aren't here legally. But that's not the question that's asked. It's not a question on the census, are you in the United States legally, as it is, are you a citizen? And even if you answer no to that question, you could still be a legal immigrant. You are not admitting to anything whatsoever. So if the point under the law, which it ought to be, is apportionment and representation in Congress should be based on the number of citizens in each jurisdiction, I see no problem with asking a citizenship-based question on the census to the American people every 10 years.
Capri, does that make a difference to you that it's not asking about legal status, it's just asking about citizenship?
Look, two things. Number one, the U.S. Constitution does not explicitly ask for citizenship in the context of the census. But I think we also need to remember that we have 3 branches of government. And in 2015, the United States Supreme Court actually ruled in the context of a Supreme Court case related to Texas and its apportionment for the congressional districts, where they tried to basically say that they wanted to separate out legal citizens from being basically counted.
Yeah, what they said is they wanted to count people who were eligible voters, and that would have left out children, people here illegally, all kinds of people.
Right.
And it was just about legal status to vote.
Exactly. And ultimately, that is actually, I think, a related issue here, because I think the concern is that when you're counting a census globally, you want to make sure that all human beings are counted when you're looking at trying to calculate for the congressional districts of a state.
Use their princesses to remove stigmas surrounding abortion and other issues. A now deleted tweet reading, "We need a Disney princess who has had an abortion. We need a Disney princess who's pro-choice. We need a Disney princess who's an undocumented immigrant. We need a Disney princess who actually a union worker. And we need a Disney princess who's trans." Well, Keystone Planned Parenthood explaining to Fox News at night, because it was deleted, upon reflection, we decided that the seriousness of the point we were trying to make was not appropriate for the subject matter or context, and we removed the tweet. Let's bring back tonight's panel. Capri, I'll start with you. I mean, they have said they think it's important for these discussions and these images and characters in pop culture to address these issues. Was it appropriate to you?
No, I don't think so. Look, I'm unapologetically pro-choice. I'm also unapologetically a huge Disney fan, okay? And this is just not right. This is gauche, as my grandmother would say. We're conflating things that should not be conflated. I understand what they're trying to achieve by basically saying that we need to place some of these, issues within the social construct of popular culture, but they couldn't have put it in a worse way. And I'm glad that they deleted it. I think that it was wrong. I think it was in poor taste. I think that it was just bad. And frankly, I think Planned Parenthood does a lot of good work on a number of, issues with, not only family planning, but, women's health. And this just, really disparaged their brand,
well,
even more so.
Guy, we spent part of the day just trying to make sure it was legit and reaching out to them, and we did get that statement back from them. But a lot of folks thought in the beginning it was kind of a hoax to make them look bad, but that was something they did choose to do before deleting it and saying maybe it wasn't the right format.
Yeah, they did that to themselves, right? So I agree with Capri's last point that Planned Parenthood may do some good work on other fronts involving women's health, but the fact remains that they are the #1 abortion provider in the country, ending hundreds of thousands of lives every year. So to me, this is a bizarre story. The idea that you would have to force feed pro-abortion politics to children watching Disney princesses to turn them into future pro-choice voters or something is sort of ghoulish and bizarre, but ghoulish and bizarre is sort of two of the calling cards of Planned Parenthood.
Well, and Jamie, I mean, it's clear over the years that a lot of change and social change has been accomplished through plugging in these subject lines and these important characters into movies, music, videos. I mean, that is how you often bring about change,
yes,
especially if you want something radical and you want to start with kids.
Yeah, strategically, that's why conservatives lament so much the liberal domination of Hollywood. They wish they had a foothold in Hollywood to push certain issues in the mainstream culture that they would like. But you're talking about, Disney characters, children, talking about abortion at that young of an age. That seems like a little too far. And I think that even the tweet they deleted, they realized that they were pushing the envelope by suggesting something like that.
You're all in agreement on that. Okay, so let's say how you feel about this. I want to quickly make sure that you each get a quick bite at this apple. New York City Councilman Rafael Espinal has introduced legislation that would just be local there, that he says he doesn't want employers to be able to force employees to be on their phones or on their email after work hours. He says it's important for workers to be able to draw a line between their work lives and their personal lives. And apparently this is based on a law in France, the right to disconnect. I'll get each of you to tell us how you feel about that movement, starting with you, Guy.
I think that this is needless government regulation. It's unworkable in a modern economy. And the way that the law is currently written, it wouldn't even make any exemptions for like law enforcement, doctors. So this would actually be a dangerous regulation on top of stupid.
Jamie?
God bless France. I love Paris, one of my favorite cities, but this reminds me of the 35-hour work week they have over there. We're a society based on entrepreneurial spirit, unlike a lot of European countries. This is not in line with our culture in America of work, 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 work.
Yeah, and Capri, my understanding is from now they would want to apply this to private employers, and they were saying you can't publish employees if they don't pick up the phone or answer your email.
Look, I mean, my understanding as well is that anyone who has to be on call 24/7 would be exempt from this. I can tell you as well, anyone in my life would love for this to actually be a law because I have no boundaries whatsoever between work and life. But I agree with Jamie. This is not part of American culture, and I lived in France for almost a year. I understand that, this is aspirational. And I also agree that, look, local governments should be able to do what they want. I served at the state level. And if New York wants to do that, more power to them, but I don't think this is something that can translate into a federal law.
Based on the hustle and bustle in New York, I don't see it going anywhere, but they can try. All right, Capri, Jamie, and Guy, thank you all very much.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, last week, a student athlete from Philadelphia died in Bermuda. We've got brand new developments in that mystery surrounding what happened to him. And our own Lucas Tomlinson had the privilege of chatting with a group of real American heroes aboard an honor flight. This is of death for 19-year-old student athlete Mark Dombrowski. The freshman from St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia was at a rugby tournament in Bermuda last week when he went missing. After a brief search, his body was found, and now police are confirming the cause of death was a fall from a 35-foot cliff. No witnesses, foul play is not suspected. Still, Bermuda police want to get a clearer picture, they say, of what happened. In France, police are investigating whether anti-Semitism was the motivation for killing an 85-year-old Jewish woman who survived the Holocaust. Mireille Knoll was stabbed 11 times and set on fire in her Paris apartment. French authorities have charged 2 unidentified men with murder. The victim's family members telling Israeli media tonight she had known one of her assailants, a Muslim neighbor, since he was 7 years old. Knoll had survived one of the most notorious Jewish roundups in France during World War II. To South Africa now, new video tonight of so-called land grab riots in the upscale coastal town of Hermanus. South African police arresting about 30 people after rioters set fire to a police station, vandalized homes and Somali-owned businesses, and tried to occupy state-owned land. South Africa is struggling with land transfers from the country's white minority to the black majority to address the legacy of apartheid, which ended in 1994. The unrest follows recent statements by South Africa's president that land transfers must be managed through dialogue and that there will be no smash and grab seizures. Meanwhile, in Brazil, thousands of troops and police are entering an area of Rio de Janeiro, experiencing a wave of violence. As drug gangs fight for control of swaths of the Brazilian city, armed militia groups and current and former police officers are also vying for influence. The battles result in frequent shootouts in marginalized areas and have occasionally spilled into the wealthier areas along the city's famous beachfronts. Well, Sunday marked National Medal of Honor Day. All living and able recipients gathered for a gala in New York City, then flew to Washington, D.C. aboard an American Airlines honor flight. Our Lucas Tomlinson was on board with these heroes to get their stories.
30 of the 71 living Medal of Honor recipients received an honor guard in New York before flying to Washington to mark National Medal of Honor Day. Benny Atkins, a Green Beret, wounded 18 times and saved by a Tiger. Doc Ballard, a Navy corpsman, threw himself on a grenade, received 3 Purple Hearts, but was owed 8, passing himself up 5 times. Gary Bakirch, a Green Beret who became a chaplain. Bruce Crandall, call sign Snake, a high school baseball All-American who flew his helicopter where no one else would. 22 flights into a hot landing zone, evacuating 70 wounded troops. He was portrayed in the movie We Were Soldiers. On board the American Airlines chartered honor flight, the oldest living Medal of Honor recipient fought in Korea.
One time, the president of Korea had me up on the stage with him. He was speaking to about 1,000 people. We were at the Blue House in Korea, and he put his arm around me and he said, because of Sergeant Rosser and a handful of men like him, 50 million people are walking free today. And I thought that was great.
Sergeant Ron Rosser, the oldest of 17 children, volunteered to avenge his kid brother's death. He brought photos of when he was called to dedicate the Korean tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington.
I ran around with Medal of Honors from the Spanish-American War, the Boxer Rebellion, the punitive expedition against Pancho Villa, the Banana Wars, as we called them, World War I, World War II, Korea, and all the rest.
I don't deserve this medal. I was a non-commissioned officer doing my job. I wear this medal for those that didn't come home. It's their medal. I am just the caretaker for it.
60 Taliban ambushed Army Captain Will Swenson's patrol. When they demanded his surrender over the radio, he threw a grenade and led the counterattack. He is one of just 2 Medal of Honor recipients still on active duty. He looks up to the older generation of recipients.
Well, they've been doing this for a lot longer, and by a lot longer, I mean
decades longer, so clearly we have a lot to learn from them. A voice for those who don't have a voice or as loud of a voice.
In Washington, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News.
True heroes. And we've got another one to introduce you to right after this break.
How to get this yard? Behind